I'm Dr. Kerry Huller. Today I'm going to talk about ADHD, executive functioning, and realistic goal expectations. So the first question you might want to know is, what is ADHD? I'm sure it's something you hear a lot about in popular media and lots of other places. From a technical perspective, the DSM-5, which is the criteria used to determine if someone has ADHD, it's classified as a neurodevelopmental disorder. In terms of things, the main things to know about ADHD, it's a disorder that involves issues with attention, hyperactivity. This involves trouble sitting still. If you have a child or teen that is sort of bouncing off the walls, shaking their leg, fidgeting a lot, things like that. Impulsivity, so making kind of rash decisions, acting without thinking. Those are kind of the core symptoms of ADHD. And in terms of just being very technical about it, the main types of ADHD are combined presentation, which means that you have both the inattentive piece as well as the hyperactivity and impulsivity symptoms, predominantly inattentive presentation, which means that the inattentive symptoms are the most prominent. You may have someone that has some symptoms in terms of maybe fidgeting and things like that, but not enough to meet criteria for the hyperactive impulsive part of ADHD. And then the predominantly hyperactive impulsive presentation is where the attention is secondary. So in other words, the impulsivity and the hyperactivity are the primary symptoms. This one, it's there. It's not something I think that's diagnosed as commonly. I think the combined presentation and the predominantly inattentive one just are probably the most common types of ADHD. So the next question are, what is executive functioning? This is a term in the last couple of years, I think it's been tossed around in popular media a lot, and there's a lot on it, but people don't actually oftentimes take the time to step back and talk about what it actually is. And if you look online, there are lots of different versions of definitions of it. However, for our purposes, really it's a set of mental processes that control many actions. And so a nice way of thinking about executive functioning is to break it down into a couple categories. So we have behavioral regulation, emotion regulation, and cognitive regulation. For any of you that have had testing completed recently for yourselves or for a child or teen, these categories may look very familiar, and that's because they're actually taken from the Brief 2, the Behavior Rating Inventory of Executive Function, 2nd edition, which is a self-report, parent report, and teacher report form that looks at executive functioning skills. Anyway, behavioral regulation involves inhibition, so the idea of being able to stop yourself from acting on your impulses when needed. So if you have a child that really wants a cookie, can they stop themselves from going to the cupboard and getting it when they know they're going to be eating dinner and the rules are they're not supposed to have cookies before dinner? Self-awareness, which involves being aware of someone's actions. So if they're doing something that's annoying someone, are they aware that they're annoying someone, or are they completely oblivious to that? Emotion regulation involves a couple of things. So it involves shifting attention. So the idea of being able to shift your focus from either one task to another one, to going from even, let's say, one homework assignment to the next without getting distracted, or even going with talking, being able to go from one topic to the next. Some people have a hard time where they get very stuck, where they keep focusing on one topic they're talking about and can't seem to transition onto something else. And emotion control, and this involves being able to regulate anger and other emotions, so they're not overwhelming. Cognitive regulation is probably more what you typically think about when you hear executive functioning. So it's things like planning, organizing, being able to get yourself started on tasks. Physical organization, so being able to keep your room organized, be able to find things easily, and using working memory skills effectively. Because that's something that actually is quite common with ADHD, to have a hard time remembering directions, especially multi-step ones. But sometimes you need to remember certain things in your mind in order to follow through and complete tasks well, unless they're written down, which we'll get to later, but writing stuff down definitely is very important. Okay, so it's important to just at least look briefly at how ADHD and executive functioning symptoms impact school functioning. The other thing to also just mention with executive functioning is there's a lot of overlap between ADHD and executive functioning. In a lot of ways, some people will sort of say that that executive functioning skills actually underlie ADHD, which makes a lot of sense. The caveat to that, which can be confusing, is that someone can have executive functioning deficits without ADHD. So they could have it due to depression, anxiety to a lesser degree, or even various cognitive impairments. The point, though, is that sometimes when people talk about executive functioning, they separate out from ADHD, and there's a huge amount of overlap. So as far as trouble with attention goes, some of these are probably things you've seen in your own children if you're watching this presentation, but these are things just to be aware of, because some of them are things you'd expect, some may be a little more subtle. So certainly trouble staying focused during classes can be a big issue, and trouble remaining focused when doing homework, or some people find that even for activities they enjoy, it's hard to stay focused, whereas others can hyper-focus, where if you have a child that really loves playing a certain video game, maybe they can sit for hours playing that video game, but they can barely sit for 20 minutes doing homework. That is actually quite common with ADHD. In terms of executive functioning, with school functioning, trouble getting started on work can be a big issue. Keeping track of assignments. I mean, a common thing is either not using a planner, or even if they use a planner, child not checking it when they get home from school. Difficulties of planning out long-term assignments. And sometimes knowing how to study and effectively carrying out those specific study tasks can be important. Because even if you have a child or teen that says, "Oh, I'm going to study for this test I have tomorrow," they may sit there but not actually know how to execute that. So, should they review their notes? Should they use Quizlet? Should they have someone quiz them? There's different things to do, but sometimes it's hard to figure out how for them to get started, so they don't always study. The other big piece of it is trouble following multi-step directions. I can imagine there are probably times where teachers have given a paragraph of instructions, and maybe your child does the first and third items, but misses several other key parts of the instructions. Okay, in terms of social functioning, so this is something that a lot of people don't always think about that really can be a big issue with ADHD. And so a lot of times, because of trouble with attention, individuals with ADHD may miss social cues, they may have trouble following conversations, or in some cases be more focused on what they want to talk about rather than what that conversation is actually on. And impulsivity can also impact friendships and positive social interactions. And so again, I'm just bringing this up because it's important to be aware that these things are real and can really impact things. And so it's important that when you're looking at treating ADHD, you're not just looking at the school piece. You want to look at the school, home, social, really all domains. Okay, and obviously speaking of all domains, now we're at the home section. So again, some of this stuff there's overlap with school, but the idea of trouble following multi-step directions, completing chores can be difficult. I'm sure a lot of you probably have had experiences where you've asked your child to take out the trash and you have to ask them 10 times so they actually do it. Or having trouble keeping the room organized, losing things easily. Evening and morning routines can often be a huge source of stress for parents, and kids can have a lot of trouble with following what to you might seem very simple, but to them, going from getting out of bed, brushing their teeth, getting dressed, eating breakfast, and getting ready for school may be very difficult. Being forgetful can be an issue, and also motion regulation trouble. Again, this is one that can oftentimes be part of ADHD, but it's not something that people really focus on or really look at too much. But it is, it is really important just to be aware of, because you can have someone that maybe gets frustrated very easily, in part because they have a hard time with the self-regulation part. Okay, so in terms of setting realistic goals, or goal expectations, there are a couple of principles that I think are really helpful to look at. The first one is the idea that some things that may seem very logical to you, either because you don't have ADHD, you're an adult, for whatever the reason, there's some things that seem very logical, but to your child or teen with ADHD, it may not be. I mean, one of the common ones I see is that parents get upset when their kids can't seem to get their laundry in the laundry hamper. And so in this case, it would seem logical. The laundry hamper's in the room, you have laundry, you put it in there. A lot of times the laundry does not get in there. It may end up on the floor, on the bed, piled in a closet, who knows where. But the idea is that things that to you may seem very, very simple are not to someone with ADHD, and so there's more we can do to kind of help make a reality of getting the laundry into the hamper, which we'll talk about later. But I just want to put that out there, because sometimes that can be a big source of frustration, especially if you're someone who's very organized, your child's not. That in itself can sometimes lead to more conflicts. Following directions can be difficult too, especially complex or lengthy ones. If you're talking to your child about something, you're going on and on, they may zone out after 10 or 20 seconds, even if they don't have ADHD. But, the idea is that if you're going on and on about something, if you're giving your child a lecture about something they did wrong, or just trying to give directions, they may zone out, they miss parts of what you said, and then that can probably lead to increased frustration, but the bottom line is you're not getting your point across then. And for someone with ADHD, it's, sometimes someone may think, oh, you just have to sit down and force yourself to do it. For anyone, it's easier said than done. But for someone with ADHD, that can be really difficult, and that's where you need different tools that, again, we'll talk about later, that are really useful for being able to sit down and get stuff done. And another thing is that with helping someone with ADHD, it's not just about the tools. So, there are common things like a calendar, a planner, a task list, things like that can be really useful to use. But just because you know that you should use them doesn't mean that that someone with ADHD is going to be able to execute that themselves, of just getting themselves into a habit and doing it. So just because someone has the tools doesn't mean that they can automatically do it. For example, if someone just wanted a set of tools, they could probably pull them up from a book or source online. But a lot of people, have treatment because it's beyond just knowing the tools. It's obviously tailoring tools to individual needs, but then it's also the idea of working on the follow through. And so I think that's a really important thing, that just because your child has a planner, as an example, doesn't mean that they're going to automatically be able to use it, without assistance of some kind. The other thing too, it's important to think about expectations, and people will differ on this in terms of what do you expect. There's certainly people that say, your child may present as, much younger than their stated age, and you should treat them that way because of having a issue. That's not something that I necessarily subscribe to. I think each person is different. I think you have to look at the person as an individual, not whether they have ADHD or not in terms of looking at that. It's one example I can think of where this certainly did not go very well. This is years ago, but someone I was working with had a child who, I think they had read something that you should treat a child as if they're about 3 years younger. And again, I don't think that's something you should follow. But in this example, that was something the parent had followed. And an issue was that they were essentially treating their, I think it was probably, let's say, we'll call him an 8th grader, like a 5th grader. And so trying to give him rules that really didn't match anything else his friends were doing made it really difficult socially. So the idea is you really need to treat your child as an individual, not view them as being younger because of ADHD or anything like that. My point, though, with this is that in general, within reason, kids, adults with ADHD should generally be able to, capable of fulfilling necessary obligations. They just may need support, scaffolding, and other things along the way to be successful. But they usually, in most cases, have the ability to do what they need to be doing. The other final thing is that in general, the more you can automate things, whether it's reminders for your child or teen to do things, whether it's regulation if you're going to have limits on technology, have the device turn itself off instead of you having to be the one to turn it off. That's going to help your child to be more independent over time because, one, they're not going to have to rely on a person to remind them of things. So these are tools they can use now, they can use as an adult on their own, and it's also less likely to cause conflicts because it's automatic and it's not you having to do something. Because what happens if, let's say, you forget to remind them of something, or they say, oh, I want 5 more minutes of playing Minecraft. Then, the question is, do you let them do it? Do you not? And then, that can create conflicts either way, which we'll talk more about that another point, but that's just something else to think about, that the more things can be automated, the better. And with things like Alexa and Google Home, you can have, even, 4 or 5-year-olds can sometimes use some of the auditory reminders. Obviously you have to have it placed in a way that's going to work for them and things like that. But the point is that even kids that are pretty young can use a lot of tools to help themselves. Okay, so in terms of talking about some tools and strategies to help your child and teen thrive, and trying to be organized, here's kind of our outline of what we're going to focus on. So we're going to talk about organization, time management, reducing distractions, harnessing fidgeting, improving focus, study tools, and improving academic skills. So the first thing for organization. So as a general rule, it's really helpful if all assignments are recorded in one place. And what's important here is that I think the typical thing for a child or teen is they get a school-provided planner. Some schools don't give them out anymore, but a lot do. And the idea, I think people think, is, they should write it down, and that's what they have to use. If that works for a child, great. However, not all kids are good at remembering to write stuff down. If a child has trouble with handwriting or remembering to pull out the planner, that can be difficult. So you want to look at each person's individual needs and also what they're willing to try doing. It also depends what options they have available. So, for example, but I think the bottom line is kids should not rely on their memory for assignments. It's important that they're all written down in one place. Whether that's they use a paper planner, they use a planner, or they get a list of assignments from the school automatically through a portal, and they write down on a whiteboard at home. But having one place where they can view all assignments at once will be really helpful and make planning easier. For kids that have access to electronics, and certainly for anyone, given the pandemic and doing homeschooling and everything, anyone that has assignments listed in an online portal will also, because they're at home, can also have access to electronics, could use an electronic planner. So My Homework and My Study Life are great examples of this. They're essentially a comprehensive planner you can access from a tablet, phone, computer, and what they do is they allow you to plug in all your homework assignments and see it in one place. But what's great about it is you can organize it by priority, by due date, so it's oftentimes a better way of visualizing it than even if all the assignments were listed in, let's say, Canvas or whatever your school uses for an online portal. Or Google Classroom is another one. For some kids, especially younger ones, the idea of a formal homework app may be a little overwhelming. And if they only have a few things at a time and aren't doing that many long-term projects, maybe they don't need a full-out electronic planner. So it's getting them used to keeping track of things with a simpler task list might be helpful, such as Google Tasks or Todoist. For anyone that has a child who has a school email account that's essentially a Google Education account, Google Tasks is actually already built into their what they have access to in most cases. Or if they have a personal Gmail account, they can use Google Tasks. And what's nice about it is it actually pops up in the same window as the email account, or you can do it with Google Docs, or actually even Google Classroom. And so this way you can kind of see the list of tasks in one place. Todoist is another program that's great for a variety of uses. If you have a child or teen that really wants the flexibility in how they organize it, especially if they're, if they're very focused on, I have to have it this way, or I don't like conforming, things like that. Some apps that give more flexibility are Google Keep and Trello, because they allow you to plan out the organization, which has its benefits. On the one hand, it gives flexibility. On the other hand, the child or teen has to be able to plan it out themselves, which takes another step. So for some kids, this works really well, especially with assistance. For others, it's worth trying, but it may not be the best option for keeping track of school stuff. In terms of planning, and this is how, whether it's, to school is normal and you're in class during the day and then do homework at home, or whether it's remote learning or some hybrid version, it's really important that there's a plan. So the idea of having a daily plan where you make an estimation of completion time for assignments, if you have classes, if it's remote learning, putting the Zoom call into your schedule, but also making a weekly plan and then adjusting it as needed. Because the problem is, especially as a child progresses, let's say into middle school and beyond, if they only make a plan day by day, you're going to kind of miss all the long-term assignments that come up and preparing for exams and things like that. Okay, so here's an example of a daily plan. This one was designed for, during the pandemic when there's remote learning. So it obviously has this is the idea of a child sitting at home doing some Zoom calls for classes, as well as a variety of assignments. A couple of things to note here with this example. So the times are listed out. Some of them are very set because they have a call during a time. Other times what they did is they blocked out, they estimated how long each assignment was going to take, and then they listed that time. So for example, we have 11 to 11:30, English, read chapters 5 and 6. So the 30 minutes is an estimated completion time, so it's listed as that, but it's put in so you can kind of look at that in the context of things. The other thing is their breaks are written in, and this is something a lot of people don't think about, but having breaks is really important. So especially for people with ADHD, if you have a hard time focusing, if you're trying to get yourself to sit for an hour, hour and a half straight without any breaks, you're probably not going to be optimally focused. I mean, even if you don't have ADHD, that's probably a long time for anyone to be optimally focused. And so what can be really helpful is to take frequent breaks. The caveat to that is you have to be able to get yourself back on task. We're going to talk a little bit more in depth about that later, but the idea here, as far as planning goes, is to actually list out your assignments. Or sorry, list out your break, rather, and have an actual task plan of what you're going to do. So as you can see here, during one break, this child's going to do push-ups and sit-ups. During another break, they're going to walk around the block. They have a lunch break. And so it's important to list out, to some degree, what you're going to do. Because for some kids, if they have a break, that just means they're going to, go on YouTube or do something kind of random, but they're not going to keep track of the time, and then they're going to really get off task. Whereas if you keep track of the time again, we'll talk more about it later, but the idea of using a timer, having a set task to do for the break, that can be really helpful. Okay, in terms of physical organization. So again, this is going to vary, certainly based on if your child or teen's in class versus doing remote learning or some combination. But for any physical papers that you do have, and also, even if stuff's electronic, there may be times where it's helpful to print it out. Because one, it means your child or teen may be on a screen less, or may also be, for some kids, they do a lot better even reading certain stuff printed out rather than on the computer. So using a binder or folder, something to keep organized that they can find papers easily. I mean, one way of doing it, especially during under normal circumstances with a binder, is ask your child or teen to find something and time in their binder, and it's time how long it takes them to do it. If they can do it in 10 to 15 seconds, it's probably fairly well organized. But if it takes much longer than that, then they probably, it's not really an efficient system, most likely. I mean, that's just a general way, but the idea is, rather than just thinking about imposing stuff on your child or teen, saying you have to do this way, you have to do that way, think about the end goal of what you're trying to accomplish. So in this case, you're trying to keep stuff organized. So there are multiple ways of doing it. Some people works well with a binder, some do folder, some like an accordion folder. So you want to think about what the end goal is and figure out what your child or teen really is willing to do in order to accomplish that task. Because if you can get them on board with trying a system out, or sometimes agreeing to try a system for a set period of time, and if it doesn't work, then try something else, at least then they're able to see for themselves not working, rather than just doing something because they're being told to do it and fighting back against it. Okay, so in terms of time management, so planning is a big piece of time management. As we talked about before, it's important to have a daily and weekly plan. It's also important to have a set routine. Because for the homework, if you can do homework at any time of day, anywhere in the house or wherever you live, that can make it hard to get started. But having a set routine can make it easier. So for example, having a set time to start, having a routine where you pull out your planner, you double check it against the online portal, you finalize your plan for the day like we talked about earlier, and then complete homework. It can make it easier over time to stick because there's more structure. In terms of reducing distractions, again, it's really important to minimize distractions. Whether you're doing homework at home, even in a library somewhere, wherever it is, you want to minimize distractions. So that means, if your child or teen has a cell phone, helping them to get to a point where they can put it away unless they need it for work. If they really, there's some cases where kids probably need a cell phone to do work, or it's beneficial. In that case, figuring out a way to differentiate it from home use is important. So one idea might be to get a dock where they can put it in that dock and only use it in the dock when they're using it for schoolwork. So this way, it separates, it creates sort of a different viewpoint for them of the phone, so it reminds them when they're using it, hey, I'm using this for schoolwork, so I'm not going to text people on it or do whatever I would do, just for fun. There are a lot of programs you can use, such as Freedom or Cold Turkey, that block access to items on websites, as well as computer programs that can be distracting, because part of reducing distractions is not even giving the temptation. So especially if your child or teen recognizes that they get distracted and are willing to try some of these programs, you could have them set it up themselves, and they pick, which programs they're going to block and things like that. For older kids, if all of it's dictated for them, there's, unless your kid's very agreeable, it's probably going to be more pushback. So the more you can get them on board, that can really help. So harnessing fidgeting. So this is interesting. So a lot of times, kids that fidget because of ADHD, a lot of people's thoughts are, you have to stop the fidgeting, and they shouldn't do it. In a perfect world, it's probably less distracting if they don't do it. But what you can do instead of just getting them to stop is actually have them harness it to, in turn, actually improve their focus. Because what you can do is you can actually trick your mind into thinking you're more focused on and interested in something than you are. And so what you do then is the movement creates an extra interest in your mind, and so allows you in turn to actually be more focused. The key, though, with fidgeting is to do it in a way where you don't have to focus on whatever the fidget is. So I don't know if anyone remembers the fidget spinners. Those were something that I think, in my opinion, were very mismarketed. That they were intended to play with, which is true. You could fidget with them. The problem is the way you had to use them, you would basically look at them the whole time and play with them, and so maybe you were listening with your auditory attention, but visually you were probably not able to focus very well on what was going on around you. So the idea with anything for your hand, or feet for that matter, is that you really need to maintain your full eye contact on what's going on around you. So if you can use a fidget and not have to actually look at it, then it's going to be a lot more beneficial. Same thing with the feet. The feet's probably a little bit easier not to look at, so kick bands are a good thing. They're pretty common in schools. If you're at home, you have a lot more flexibility. So you can use, a desk bike or elliptical, under the desk. And the idea is, child, or even you, if you're using these, are probably not going to get a good quality workout while you're doing it. But the idea is to getting some movement in can in turn reduce the fidgeting and in turn help you to focus better. And you can also do it without actual devices. So you can, with your feet, wiggle your toes 10 times. Or with your hands, tap each finger lightly at a set pace. It's more about having a set routine to do than anything else that can help with this piece of it. Okay, so in terms of improving focus, harnessing fidgeting is important, which I mentioned earlier. Other things that can be really useful are using interval apps such as Seconds or Pomodoro. And so what they do is there's this idea that you can or the Pomodoro method, that you can stay focused for about 20-25 minutes max at a time. So the idea is you work for 25 minutes on, you get a 5-minute break, and then you kind of keep going back to that. And so what these apps do is they kind of give you an alert when it's time for your break time, and then another alert when it's time to go back to work. And so you kind of keep on this cycle. It's sort of like if any of you are athletes and you train for, let's say, for running, you might do some interval training where you do, maybe you sprint for 2 minutes and then walk for 30 seconds. Or something along those lines. And so it's this idea that because you can't sustain a certain level of effort forever, you kind of do it just enough that you can stay optimally focused, and then you take a break and go back to it. Other ideas are also you can use a vibrating watch. So there are a bunch out there, like Watchminder is one company, for example, that makes them. And what you can do is you set the alerts for set intervals, so maybe it's every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes. And so what happens is your child or teen gets a vibration alert, at that set time. And so if they've zoned out, they're not zoned out for that long because the vibration reminds them to focus back in. And if they're already on task Anyway, when it goes off, maybe a reminder to stay on task. Something like this, and you can use it. I mean, if your child's older, has a smartwatch of some kind, you can oftentimes run different programs through that to get the vibration too. With this, some kids really find it helpful, others find it extremely annoying. So you really just have, I think that one's more individual preference, but I think for a lot of cases it's worth trying. As I mentioned before, using timers to regulate work and break times can be helpful. 360 thinking is a great one. It's available, I think, on both Apple devices. And what's great about it is it's unlike a lot of timers that just show numbers, it basically shows a clock. And it breaks the clock into the green phase, which is the beginning of the task, the yellow phase, which is sort of the main part of the task, and then the red phase, which is the cool down or the wind down part. And so it allows you to visualize time to kind of, because something that's common is a lot of times people with ADHD have a hard time with, or what people refer to it as sort of time blind. And so kind of by using a timer that actually shows a clock, it actually can help increase your ability to pay attention with time. And you can actually do the same thing without an app. If you take an analog clock, like a typical one that you get, let's say it's in a school classroom, what you can do is shade in the amount of time that the child has to work for, and then it allows them to sort of see the clock as they're going and visualize how much time does 30 minutes actually mean. What does that actually feel like? Okay, so here are some technology apps. I mentioned a few of them before, but here's just a list of them to be helpful in terms of things you can do. So for the task list and notes planner apps, My Homework and My Study Life are more of the formal homework apps I mentioned. The Reminders app is an app it's on pretty much every Apple device. It's a task list app that you can use. And your child can use it on their device. You can use it on yours if you have an iPhone. If you have family sharing set up, or actually even if you don't, you can actually have a shared list. So if there's stuff that you want to put on your child's list automatically, you can do that with this app. Google Tasks, it's a pretty simple task list. G-Tasks, is another one that has a lot of benefits. What's nice about G-Tasks actually is it combines a calendar and a task list into one. So you could have certain tasks and a calendar that you look at the same time, which for a lot of people for planning purposes can be really useful. Mobile Notes is another. It's a strange spelling because it's a European company, but basically it's a great program. What it does is you can log in from pretty much any electronic device, and it's essentially a notes app, but it also allows you to create a formal checklist with things. And if it's on certainly a phone, tablet, I think you can do it from a computer as well. You can also set reminders, so it allows you to kind of set reminders within a notes app for things you need to do. In terms of tools for staying on task, Toggle is a great one. It's a program that allows you to track your time. So what you would do is for a child, they might put in math homework. They start the timer. If they take a break, they pause it. They hit the start again, and then they hit the stop when they're done. And so what happens is it creates a log of how long it takes them to do each assignment. So at the end of the day or the end of the week, they can pull up the log and see how much time did they actually spend on work and civic assignments. So this has a couple of benefits. One, it allows them to figure out, how much were they on task versus did they really get off task. If it took them 2 hours to do 5 math problems, that probably means they were not very focused the whole time. It also really helps with future planning, in that if the assignments are pretty similar, if they know it took 30 minutes to do math assignment, then probably it would presume that for planning for the future, if it's a similar length math assignment, it might take about the same amount of time. So it helps with improving time estimations as another item. Second is the interval app I mentioned for kind of staying on task. Time Tracker and Sessions are other programs that you can use to track your time. These, again, are sort of similar to if you happen to have a job where you have to really, itemize your time. So, for example, attorneys may have to track, every, let's say, 15 minutes what client they're doing a project for, or, lots of other professions as well. But so it's the idea of just really itemizing your time is the point of it. And what's interesting, too, is some children teams actually find that they stay on task better when they're tracking their time because they know they're being tracked. And, you can also do this, you can do this on a piece of paper as well. I mean, there's lots of ways to doing it, but the benefit of an app is you just click a button and it's all there as opposed to having to write it out. Thanks a lot.